Guess who's back? Back again. Countdown's back. Tell a friend. It is Monday morning, people. And let's get the week started right with some Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, except for last Friday, we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and as you all know by now, this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert opinion on the hot button issues and content of the sure-to-be amazing World of Warcraft Classic. Now, lengthy intro alert, people. As I just alluded to, some of you may be wondering, hey Josh, where have you been? We missed you last Friday. What gives, man? Well, a funny thing happened. There I was, sitting in the future in Australia on a Saturday morning, as we do here down under, and I woke up with the plan to finish off the latest episode and release it on what would have been late Friday night Eastern Standard Time. However, I had a bunch of Discord and Twitter notifications on my phone when I woke up, and I thought, that's a bit more than usual. Did I finally get that interview with the Blizzard janitor? Well, as many of you know, that wasn't the case. What was blowing up my phone was many amazing Countdown fans letting me know that we got some new official Classic news, and really the first thing of substance that we as a community could pore over since the Forbes interview with J. Allen Brack on January 30th of this year. Needless to say, the news was incredibly noteworthy. I immediately put the planned episode to one side and began work on the Countdown to Classic analysis of this news. And thus I had to make the very tough decision to basically skip a scheduled episode for the first time since the show began 4 months ago. Thankfully, many of you were cool with this decision, and you've been patiently waiting on what the show may have to say on the matter since then. Well, I'll tell you how this week is going to go. Today, you'll be listening to an in-depth interview conducted not even 24 hours ago with listener of the show and previous contributor Niel, who sheds a technical light on the Classic news via his 15 plus years of experience in the gaming industry, working for AAA developers in all facets of game design. After that chat, I'll have a quick bit of Calling Countdown with another listener of the show, which was recorded prior to the big news dropping, hence why it isn't discussed there. On Wednesday, you'll hear another interview with Daryl Marky Mark, all about Warlocks. However, that interview was conducted after the news dropped, so we touch on the news very briefly for a few minutes before we get into some blanket Warlock coverage. So do keep an eye out for that one. Finally, there will be Friday's episode. This will be a relatively intensive breakdown of the Classic news and will be a forums-based episode all about the community's reactions, as well as having a few of my own interpretations sprinkled in. Now, there were almost 700 comments left on the topic over at the WoW Classic subreddit. I've read the majority of them. There were a few relevant threads over at the official forums as well, with titles such as, "Now that hashtag changes are official, what's next?" And also, "No changes wins." Now, those threads each came with hundreds of comments of their own. There were also YouTubers abound with some knee-jerk reaction pieces about claims that no changes were now confirmed from what we got in that release from Blizzard. So, did no changes win? Did changes win? Or did nobody win? I'll give you my answer on Friday. Now, I know it seems strange for the show to have been quiet on the matter up until now and not drop everything and provide an emergency pod on the news. The thing with Countdown to Classic is this. I'd rather deliver you the same style of show you're accustomed to instead of pushing something out a little too soon. I've taken a breath and let everything wash over me a few times by reading and then reading again. And then I read some more just to be sure. I changed my mind a couple of times on a few things in that article. It's been a bit of a slog tearing through it all, but I will manage to piece it all together for you and give you a rational argument, putting forward points for all sides, hopefully in a way that you'll enjoy and be entertained by. I just ask for a little bit more patience as you've already been so kind to afford me, as I noticed that I didn't get any death threats about missing last week's show. So thanks everyone for that. But I'll get that to you by the end of Friday Eastern Standard Time this week, I do promise. But with that long preamble done, let's get into this interview with Niel and hear a developer's translation of the classic news. Here we go. Okay, a big countdown to Classic. Hello and welcome to previous caller on the show. Niel, how are you?
I'm good. How about you, Josh?
I'm good. Thank you so much for agreeing to come back on the show. Now, if people, just to let all the listeners know, basically, obviously during the week, we got some pretty big news in terms of the fact that we got an update from Blizzard, which is all a lot of people were hoping for over the last 7 months. And then we finally got some news. And funnily enough, as great as it was to hear from Blizzard, they actually got pretty technical in a way in terms of what they were telling us. Now, it was a developer update. And, you know, for someone like me who's not really down with the technical side of things and building a game, some of it kind of flew over my head, and it's great to reach online for certain resources with people who can interpret. And you reached out to me, and obviously if people don't remember, last time you called in the show a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned that obviously you have worked in the industry for the last 15 years. You work for an undisclosed AAA developer, and basically you've got a lot of experience in the industry and in how to develop a game. So you offered your services to perhaps interpret for the listeners of Countdown to Classic a little bit what it all means. So you're feeling pretty confident about being able to do that?
Yeah, no problem.
Fantastic. Now, just before we get to that, obviously with this being one of the regular, in-depth interviews that we do here on Countdown to Classic, we didn't get to touch too much on your World of Warcraft resume last time. So just so everyone gets to know you a little bit better as a player of World of Warcraft, how about we go through your WoW resume? So let's start again from the beginning. Now, you did mention this last time, but with as much specificity as you're comfortable with, where in the world are you from?
I'm from Montreal, Canada.
And how long have you played World of Warcraft?
I started in closed beta, so that was a long time ago, 2004.
And what was your original main character's name?
I had many starting characters, but the one I stuck with the most was the warrior, Niel.
And what was that character's race?
Oh, I was on Deadman, the best horde race.
Okay, fantastic. What other classes have you hit a level cap with?
Mage, that wasn't vanilla, but in the other expansions, I maxed a rogue, a monk.
And what server did you play on when you first started playing World of Warcraft?
Skull Crusher. US.
And do you prefer to play on PvP or PvE servers?
I prefer PvE for like the earlier expansions. It makes the world feel more alive.
And what was your highest raid experience in vanilla, and also if in any later expansions?
In vanilla, we got to Twin Imps in AQ. We almost downed them, but then once BC came out, our last raid we did was in Naxxramas because we just wanted to see it. We got to patchwork and just died repeatedly. But in the other expansions, we still raided a bit. Pandaria was one of the good ones, but also BC. We raided up to Black Temple.
And are you currently playing World of Warcraft? And if so, where?
Yeah, I'm not playing retail right now. But I'm playing on Sunwell. Well, I was playing on Felmist for a while. It was a really good server, but unfortunately, it's closed now. So it's Sunwell.
No problems. Now, do you have a quick plug for any YouTube channels or Twitch streams or anything or anywhere online where people can find you and your work?
Well, I'm mostly on Discord. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, also have a Twitter account at the Niel Deal. That's pretty much it.
All right. Now, complete this sentence so we know where your allegiances lie. For the
Horde, baby.
Okay, fantastic. Now that we know a little bit more about you as a player, Niel, if we can just please refresh the listeners' memories, because you mentioned, as I mentioned at the top of the show, you have quite a fair bit of AAA game development experience. If you could just let listeners know your development background, obviously without needing to go into detail and unveil the mysterious companies that you've worked for in the past. If you can just tell us as much as you can about your background in the industry.
Yeah, sure. I started as a tester for a big studio. It was my first experience. It was quite interesting. And then I did some production testing. I touched a bit of programming. I did some build system work also. And more recently now I'm in the product management branch of things. Fantastic.
Now, through the work that you've done over the years, again, and obviously you can appreciate, we've spoken before, that I am incredibly, what would be the words to put it, I have a great lack of knowledge when it comes to what it takes to build a game from the ground up. I'm not well versed in software or hardware or what kind of, even the engines that we build games on or what it takes. I take my product when it's finished and I enjoy it. But obviously a lot of people and a lot of listeners of the show do dabble a little bit or have worked in the industry and very much so know how to build a game from the ground up. So in particular with what you've done in the past, you have very much so spent a lot of time coding, haven't you?
Yep.
So with that in mind, did the news that we got from Blizzard just a few days ago on Friday, just as a general starting off question, did that sing to you in a particular way? Did you think you had a pretty good idea of the kind of trials and tribulations that Blizzard might be going through, or was it a bit vague to you?
I was actually quite surprised that for a communication to the public, it was still quite technical. It was not too much, but just enough that I got the gist of it. It made sense to me, and I think also it spoke to the player base. Like, even if some of that stuff is, like the database stuff, maybe it's not very clear to everyone, but I think it made a lot of sense.
Okay, now what I figured we'd do is there's about maybe 7, 8, 9 key sentences in this press release that I wanted to basically quote back to you and get your interpretation, your professional translation for the Countdown to Classic listeners of what your thoughts are on what Blizzard is really trying to say, or what they could have gone through in this journey to Classic. So if your game, we'll start from the beginning, and the first, we'll just be going it through it as it reads out. And the first sentence I wanted to focus on was when Blizzard says the following: Once we had our starting point, we began taking stock of what we had in the source code and what we could make available, which included restoring the original development database from archival backups. Now, in hearing a sentence like that, we've obviously been told by Blizzard that, it's a more difficult project than was initially thought by a lot of people. And when building the game again in terms of a modern architecture and modern framework, they've obviously tried to do it from a couple of different ways. But when you go back to things like the original database and building up from the archives, have you been involved in a project like that before?
Yes, not an MMO though. I've never worked on a game like that, but all of that process, those parts of a game, I know very much of though.
Is that something that comes up during, say, like your basic remastering process? Yeah,
because maybe we'll get into the later parts of the news, but once like 14 years ago, I'm sure pretty much everyone designed a database schema in a different way. It was we're all beginners for that, I guess, and throughout the development of WoW, they changed the schema of the database, and I'm guessing once they restored the original, they looked at how it was made back then, and I'm guessing most of the people that work on WoW now have no idea how it was made back then, and even the classic team, we don't know if they worked on vanilla back in the day. So it must really have been a big surprise on how it was made. So making that work with the old code, I think was the first step to make sure that they were able to do it.
Well, again, appreciating that you can't unveil any title names or anything like that. Have you been involved through your work in the past of, as you've just mentioned, having to basically build on a previous team's work and figure out how the hell they did things and needing to interpret their work before you could realize how you could move forward with yours?
I haven't worked on a remaster, but every game, especially in big companies, if they're making sequels or stuff like that, every game starts off from a previous game's engine. That's usually how it goes. So I'm familiar with the process of taking something that's old and was made a while ago and making it for a modern game. It's just I haven't worked on a remaster itself.
Okay. Now, still focusing on, because obviously Blizzard broke this up into their chat about a first prototype and a second prototype. And I'm still focusing on this first prototype that we've begun with. And they go on to say that after stitching various key pieces together, we had a locally rebuilt version of patch 1.12 running internally. Now, my question for you would be, how difficult of a process do you think that would have been for Blizzard to essentially build that old version themselves without using the modern framework, which it sounds like they did with the first prototype?
Most likely what they did is, most likely in their source control system, they have some kind of tagging, or, what we call labels or branches or stuff like that, like a way to make permanent a certain version of the game. So they most likely had that. They took that and they saw the original database schema, and so they had most likely one of the developers had to host a local database on their machine to that specification, and then make the game work and make the game run from there. Also, I want to establish certain terms that I'll be using throughout this interview.
Sure.
We'll be talking about when I'll be saying game, I mean the game server, which basically all the logic and all the magic is happening. I'll be talking about database, which is the how to make your data permanent and where the permanence of the data, and the client, which is what you run on your computer. So that step would have been to take the game, make it run through whatever way possible, just to make sure that they would be able to. And 1.12 is most likely just a label or a branch that they would just take back. And I think it was maybe a couple of years ago that when the legacy fans asked Blizzard to make legacy servers, and they said that maybe we don't have the source code. That we pretty much knew that was bullshit. But now it just confirms that they had everything. They just needed to spend time doing it.
Right. Okay. Now, the next sentence that I wanted to focus on was this one, where they say, and I think this is going to be quite interesting to get your opinion on this one. Our initial runs exposed a few expected issues. The game sometimes crashed, didn't recognize our modern video cards, and was incompatible with our current login system. So I just wanted to ask you about those ones one by one, and what your thoughts would be behind why they might have been having these issues. Now, I know this one is incredibly general and incredibly hard to forecast, given that we weren't in the room with them, but just generally, why do you think the game would have just been crashing on them?
Well, it could depend on a lot of things. From my private server experience, the old vanilla client does crash. Also, it depends on the game itself when it sends data to the client. Maybe there's things there that makes the client crash. Also, the game might mean also the server, right? It might mean that there was some old stuff in there that made literally the server crash. It could also be from their setup that they made to for that first prototype. So I'm sure it was a big headache for them to make out what was causing these crashes at the beginning, for sure.
The next headache that they point out, which is something that obviously they have highlighted, I feel like they've highlighted, or at least has come up a lot in the forums over the last few months, was that they were struggling to get the version of 1.12 that they had rebuilt to recognize modern video cards. What are some of the difficulties that developers go through with making games for modern video cards?
The thing is, with the old client, there's a lot of new technologies associated with the modern video cards. The shader versions are quite higher than they were. That means that all the little technology to make stuff look better in a simpler term. So I'm pretty sure that modern video cards work with the old client because the private servers run and there don't seem to be much issues. But some of the more recent technologies in modern video cards is things like FreeSync, G-Sync, or the more recent pixel shaders. And all of that maybe wasn't compatible with the old client, and maybe they're looking to make sure. Well, we'll talk about it next, but we will have that support with the modern client.
Well, you've just raised something that has got my conspiracy theory flaring a little bit, and I'm not saying this is what we're getting, but just from what you said, I hadn't thought about it before, but now I've just thought about it. When you say that obviously private servers, clearly run on a lot of people's systems without any problem, and they're all on modern video cards and don't generally have any issues. And I presume that private servers, I'm not sure how much you know about how they're built, but I presume that they are, they would be built in a similar fashion to what perhaps this first prototype would have been built using. Would that be fair to say?
Yes and no, because private servers, like the game itself, was reverse engineered, so it was total guesswork. It's similar, of course, because it runs, but I'm not sure the game is like the server itself is very similar, like the code. That I couldn't say, but yeah, it's the same client though.
Okay, so the follow-up question is this, and I'm not trying to get overly controversial or anything. I'm literally just thinking out loud. But when you said that, you know, private servers don't seem to struggle with modern video cards, so it's funny that, I mean, I'm saying it seems funny that Blizzard was struggling to have modern video cards recognize their work with their rebuilt version of 1.12. Could this possibly suggest that they were putting something different through those modern video cards, like updated graphics?
That's a good question. I'm pretty sure that no, though, because if they're talking about the old client, I'm pretty sure they were working with the old game data as well. That would have been weird to, you know, use the modern game data with the old client. So maybe what they're saying when they say we didn't recognize our modern video cards is maybe like they used a public ready term, you know, just to maybe what they mean is the modern video cards aren't taken full advantage of in this whole client. Maybe that's what they mean, because they didn't recognize, like, straight up. I don't think that's true, or maybe they're using another old client that the public doesn't have. Maybe, I don't know, but that's my interpretation of it.
All right, we can quickly debunk my crazy theory and say that there wasn't a second developer on the grassy knoll. That's okay. So when we talk about the next point, and they say that they had problems with their version being compatible with the current login system, what does that mean to you? What kind of issues might they have hit?
Well, for sure, I think the login system was changed a lot during the years, and if they want to use the modern, the modern, it comes with the new login system. Right? I've looked at private server code a bit since it's hosted on GitHub, but I don't know that much about the login system, the old login system itself, though. But it's mostly you make a request and that server just redirects you to the correct path and makes sure that you log in with all your information and all of that. Maybe the new login system is completely different on how it communicates with the game server and all that, and they had to make sure that the information being sent and what was required of the client had to be there, basically.
Okay, now moving on to this second prototype that they then give a very good explanation of what's going on with where it seems they're at now after that seemingly failed and ditched first attempts just to build from the ground up with their own archived information. They've then gone away and said, you know what, no, stuff that. Let's work with the modern, and please tell me if I'm getting any of this crudely wrong, but it seems that they've satisfied themselves that basically they would make a second attempt with the modern architecture and reverse engineer from there. So the sentence I want to focus on is just a more general one at the start of that second prototype paragraph. And they say, speaking of engineering, World of Warcraft is a very, very data-driven game, which means the basic code is flexible and the specific way it behaves is controlled by information contained in databases. Now, they go on to explain those databases very well and how tables and everything works, and we'll get to that soon. But what I wanted to focus on now and ask you is, just as a general explanation to people who might know nothing about the way in which information is entered into these kinds of games, when they say something like the basic code is flexible, what's your explanation of that kind of term, even though they do explain it a little bit themselves?
The important part of the sentence is World of Warcraft is a very data-driven game. That means that if they want to, to make a new behavior, a new NPC or something like that. They don't have to make any modification to the code. The designer itself can just they most likely have an editor, and they just can create a new NPC with all of its abilities, and he can create new abilities for that NPC just with that editor. There's no code changes required, and that to me it speaks to the maturity of the developers at that time, because back in 2004, I can assure you most games were not that much data driven. It gives a lot more flexibility to the designers, while leaving all the heavy technical stuff to the programmers, and it makes for a more fluid workflow of developing a game. So when they mean the code is flexible, it means that in the code there are many different components that are readily available to the designers to make their, I would say, dreams come true, right? So if I wanted to make an NPC that breathes fire and then jumps for like in the air and starts flying, I can make that. Like the engine has everything I need already, and I don't need to ask a programmer to code the behavior I want to do.
Okay. Now, moving on to something that has got me scratching my head a little bit, and I do hope that I can use all of your expertise on this one. The sentence is as follows, and they're talking about obviously using the modern architecture and reverse engineering, and they say this. Okay, I'll just start from the beginning maybe. So we asked ourselves, would it still be possible to deliver an authentic classic experience if we took our modern code with all its back-end improvements and changes and used it to process the patch 1.12 game data? While that might seem counterintuitive, this would inherently include classic systems like skill ranks, old quests, and terrain, talents, and so on, while later features like transmog and achievements would effectively not exist because they were entirely absent from the data. Now, the reason I'm asking you about this sentence is obviously a lot of people have focused on this and they say, right, that's it. Blizzard's told us that means no transmog, no achievements in Classic. Now, just reading the sentence, whilst I do agree with that in a way, what they're actually telling us is that it's not in the data of patch 1.12, but obviously the framework was there with the modern code. So is it possible? I mean, of course anything's possible, but what does that sentence mean to you? Does it mean absolutely transmog and achievements is not going to be in the game because it's not possible, or it's possible but it's just easier left out?
It's possible but easier left out. Also, be careful with that sentence. It doesn't mean that there will be absolutely no changes.
I agree.
Because we don't know what the modern code does. So maybe there's some, the way the game feels might be different because of it. It might not be game systems, but maybe something else, like the way character moves, or there might be differences there. Maybe certain features won't be, but maybe the modern code will change things.
Now, one little question that comes up just at this sort of interim juncture here is, does it surprise you as a developer that they didn't go to this idea for the second prototype first? Like, it sort of surprises me that they tried to build from the ground up first, as opposed to using their modern framework or their modern architecture that they already had and just working backwards.
I think it makes sense when you want to do. I will say remaster, but it might not be a remaster, like a graphical remaster. But it makes sense to run the old thing first, because you want to see how it behaves in its natural environment, right? So you want to make sure that works, and that's your basic playground. But you also, and they've specified this, you also want to make it the modern quality, right? So you have to start from there and then see where you can bring it while being true to the experience of Classic.
Okay.
So that makes sense to me how they did it.
Okay. Now, the next sentence I want to focus on is this one. And this is a sentence that was a funny one in terms of the attention it got. I was watching a tips video about this one, and this is one sentence that he really highlighted. And I'm in I'm in disagreement with his assessment of this particular sentence, and I want to get your opinion. The sentence is as follows. Any differences in behavior between our development builds and the patch 1.12 reference can be systematically catalogued and corrected while still operating from a foundation that's stable and secure. Now, granted, that's only the back half, that's only the last sentence of that paragraph, but that was the one sentence that Tip really said, right, that to him confirms no changes. Blizzard is writing subtext there, and they're trying to tell us without actually saying it explicitly, no changes from that sentence. I don't see it. Is there something I'm missing?
It doesn't mean... I want to be careful with my words here. It's like of course they mean that if there are differences with this new modern code, they want to correct it and make sure it's cataloged and corrected. But we don't know what the extent of that, right? Maybe their intention is no changes, but there could be a million different things that change, and really like subtle changes. And to catalog all of those is going to be, well, I don't know. There may be 12 changes or there may be a million. I have no idea the amount of work that takes. Does that mean that the alpha or beta period will be long to make sure that we catalog all of that? But what would be our basis though? Because all our basis for testing it is private servers for the public. But maybe they will make their old, like the really old vanilla available for us to compare. I don't know. It's to me it could be a lot of work. It could be very little work if there's not much things that are changed. But to me, it doesn't mean like no changes. It means the developers want to make sure that using the modern code doesn't change the experience. I think that's what that sentence means.
Okay. Now, they obviously from this point on go on to get pretty technical, and they start to go through things like table data, and they explain in layman's terms as best they can to us, the players of the game, how exactly Warcraft uses data through tables in order to deliver cause and effect through what we do within the game. Now, just to explain to people perhaps a little bit more, the one thing that a couple of things I'll ask. I'll start with this. Now, they didn't really define very well, and I know a lot of listeners will already know this, and they'll roll their eyes and go, come on, Josh, but just help me out a little bit. What is a Lua script? I'm very unsure. Can you tell me all about that from sort of in the simplest way possible?
Lua is a language. It's a scripting language, which means it is interpreted by a runtime program.
Okay.
So they have Lua support in World of Warcraft, and when they the Lua scripts written by designers means that if you want to create a specific behavior for a new NPC you're making or a new dungeon boss, the designer itself can use the Lua script to make it. That's pretty much what it is. Now,
what was your interpretation when they start to get into things like explaining the way in which table data works? What was your interpretation of perhaps why Blizzard was doing this. I mean, my interpretation is basically they're saying that with the modern architecture, things are just basically far more flexible. And so perhaps with Classic, they can, it might be a little bit, I don't know, are they trying to tell us it's going to be a faster development time than first anticipated? Are they trying to tell us it's actually quite the opposite? What's your interpretation?
That's a good question. I was surprised by how technical they went with that communication. I think that means that they know what they're doing, basically. Like, what I read from that is, okay, like, these guys know what they're doing. They're progressing, definitely, because they're looking to migrate the database schema to the new one. And, it's, to me, it looks like they've got the bases covered and things are going well. That what speaks to me. As for the progress, like a percentage or where they're at in terms of release, I have no idea, because once they do that, maybe they'll find something else that needs to be migrated, and I have no idea about that. But to me, it seems that my original estimate of November 2019 is still quite logical.
Okay. Now, I won't go really too much into the table data that they go through. As you say, they do get a bit surprisingly technical, and it's certainly any information that we get was fantastic to receive. We're not complaining at all, but it was something that flew over my head a little bit, but I read it a couple of times, and I think I got the gist of it. But moving on to this all-important final paragraph that a lot of people have been focusing on, I guess more from, again, your developing background, and what I would ask you about is when they say things like additional improvements will include modern anti-cheat / botting detection, customer service, and battle.net integration. Just focusing on that little bit first. Can you tell me, do you have much experience with designing or having to think about or working around anti-cheat software or botting detection?
Yeah.
So what is that a very difficult process to try and think 2 steps ahead of what players might do to work the system?
Basically, in a live game, like an MMO, you need to detect a certain behavior in order to take action on it. So if someone is bot, someone is using a speed hacker or stuff like that, you need to have a way to quickly identify, so a GM can take a look at it quickly and take action if it's really happening. So the detection itself might have changed a lot over the years. Maybe they went to a modern machine learning way of identifying things and taking action quicker, instead of looking for a specific behavior signature. I don't know if what I'm saying makes any sense to you. But
no, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, I'm sure it'll make sense to a lot of people. I do understand what you're saying.
All right. So I'm pretty sure that's what they mean with the anti-cheat botting detection.
Okay. Now tell me, out of interest, when you're working at a AAA developer, is getting put on anti-cheat detail, or if you get the botting job, is that like one of the shittier jobs you can get? Like, oh man, I'm on botting this week.
It depends. If you're a GM, maybe, but if you're a developer, I think it could be a nice challenge, because you're looking at detecting a certain behavior and making sure that you don't have false positives. So it could be interesting, maybe depending on that programmer's taste.
Okay. Now, here's what I'll do. We've kind of covered off on the really technical aspects of what they've said, and I'll just ask you now about perhaps this next little bit of that final paragraph that is maybe a bit more up to general interpretation as opposed to your field of expertise. But tell me what this means to you when they, and I'll read the sentence again in its entirety, and it goes as follows. Additional improvements will include modern anti-cheat / botting detection, customer service, and battle.net integration, and similar conveniences that do not affect the core gameplay experience. What does that last part of the sentence mean to you?
I think it's blurry for a reason. I think they might don't know what that means. They just want to throw it out there and say it, that there will be other changes that might not affect the core gameplay experience. That means maybe the add-on API. That means maybe an in-game shop, because it doesn't affect the core gameplay experience, right?
Yeah.
Maybe in their words, that means it doesn't affect it. So maybe there's something there that they're not sure themselves, and that's why they say it, because they want to prepare maybe people for having other things from the modern WoW into classic WoW. So it could mean a lot of differences of different things. I don't think it will be big changes, but maybe some things that will make maybe some people mad. I don't know. Like if we're talking about guild banks, maybe, like, does this fall into that? I have no idea.
Well, you said a couple of magic words there, and perhaps we'll put on our tinfoil hats now for a second and project just as two fans of the game as to what this post might mean on the whole. And you used the magic word of cash shop, and the more and more I think about Classic, and I'm not trying to be controversial, I'm simply giving a personal opinion, and it's not a God, what's the word I'm looking for here? This is not a projection by me. This is not a prediction. That's what I was looking for in any way, shape, or form. But I want to say the following. After having read this statement, and after having read that final sentence that we just focused on, I'm starting to get more and more to the point where I really would not be shocked if Blizzard implemented a cash shop, given that it's 2018 and where their business model has taken them. And the wording of this post, I think, not only leaves the door open, but sort of does suggest, just from that last sentence, that it might well come. Did you get that same vibe? You just mentioned something like it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible, the way they're wording that sentence. I think it could be something they're exploring. It's definitely possible. Maybe what they'll do is put it in Classic, and they'll have an open beta, and people will go nuts about it. Maybe they'll remove it, but I think to them it makes sense because it's easy money. And it could be, in a classic theme of a game shop, right? There could be things there that are not available in the retail WoW or something like that. Like there are ways to make that a classic experience. Maybe, I don't know. It's definitely possible.
Now, the next tinfoil hat related question that I wanted to pose to you, and we've already touched on it. I've actually already asked you when they said something like, the modern video cards perhaps struggling with what they had initially built with that first prototype. And I asked you, well, does that mean maybe are they tinkering with updated graphics? The follow on from that question is they do mention a few things. Like they say the word, and tell me, please, I'm happy to be told I'm absolutely crazy, but they say the word, things like terrain a couple of times through the post. And they're talking about, bringing that, old models, old terrain, character models, things like that from the modern architecture back into the old 1.12 game data. I just feel like those mentions suggest to me that maybe they're doing something with that. Do you feel the same, or do you say, Josh, relax, you're crazy?
I think you can relax, but however, I will point out that maybe they're keeping things open. Maybe they're building Classic to say, okay, maybe we'll support both. Maybe we'll just support one or the other, but I think for now they may be keeping things open to the possibility of maybe updating the graphics or not. Maybe what they're saying when they have the terrain in the database means the layout, but the graphics themselves, is in the game file. So I don't know. They may be keeping things open on that regard.
And I found the part that I was looking for where they say it again when they define what file data is. And granted, this is a definition of what file data is, so I shouldn't be sort of, paying that much attention to it. But for some reason, I'm just like, Yeah, they use those specific examples when they say file data is often very dense data like 3D models, textures, animations, and terrain. All examples of things that would be updated if they were to update the graphics, obviously. So again, I'm sure, I'm on the record as saying I'm not going to lose my mind if they update the graphics. I don't want them to, but I'm still going to play the game if they do. But reading that, I'm just like, they were a little bit specific there. Do you get any of the same kind of vibe, or is it just like, nah, don't worry about it?
I think you shouldn't worry about it, because if they want to update all the models, textures, animations, and terrain from the modern game files, that is a lot of work, because it's not only the character models, the NPC models, and terrain and animation. It's also item models, and there's a lot of items in vanilla and a lot of old models to go through, and finding the right one to update with. It may be easier than I think, but I think it's still a bit of work that they might not be inclined to do. But like I said, maybe they're keeping things open, that maybe it could be possible, and they're designing Classic on the back end of, maybe we'll be able to. So I wouldn't worry that much.
All right, and you've talked me off the ledge already, because the one overarching concept that I keep coming back to throughout this whole Classic project is my sort of prime directive that I keep remembering from Blizzard's aspect is the fact that they told us they really didn't want to put obviously get enough work into it to make it a great product, but they didn't want this to turn into a huge epic project, and they didn't want to run two MMOs effectively side by side with two development teams running at the same time. So obviously the less time, the less effort on their end, the better, and that has always been a boon in the argument for the fact that we maybe wouldn't be getting updated graphics or some kind of a remaster. So yes, thank you for reminding me of that. Now I should ask in general, what was your feeling? How did you react to this news? What was your initial interpretation, or what did you do when you saw this drop?
I was quite happy. I was getting home from work, and I saw the news, and I got home, and the first thing I did was read through it. I was surprised, but like I said earlier, I was surprised at how technical they went, and I think in their mind they went, okay, we need to give them some news, obviously, and while we don't have anything to show, maybe, so let's get into how we're doing it. And I think it shows a lot of transparency from them. Maybe I will say a bit late, because a lot of people have been whining about the cold dead stare of Blizzard from BlizzCon. After BlizzCon, of we're working on it, and there's not much info. So, but I was mostly happy with the direction they're taking and the details they've given.
When you say it was surprising to you, even as a developer, to see how technical they got, do you get on the phone to your developer buddies and go, look at these crazy motherfuckers over at Blizzard spilling all the game secrets?
No, it's not that bad. It's not that technical.
I would imagine so. Okay. All right. Well, if we move along, that's pretty much, is there anything more that you wanted to say? Is this changed? Well, I should ask you this, really. Well, how about this first and foremost? Do you lean no changes or changes yourself?
I am no changes, but I am also for changes that, like they said, don't affect the core gameplay experience.
Okay, so
that may sound as a heresy to some, but yeah.
So what's your definition of not affecting the core gameplay experience?
Things like the modern add-on API, things like guild banks, because to me, having no guild banks to speak of, and the only solution to that is sharing an account with someone else or many people, and it even violates their own rules. I think to me is a no-brainer. That's a change that is only beneficial to the game. That's mostly things like that I agree with. Also, modern client will have changes. Maybe we'll support HDR. We'll support all kinds of resolutions or stuff like that. I am for.
Okay. Well, with something like Guildbanks being perhaps the only example that you're saying might actually be sort of in the game, but not really part of the game, but wasn't in vanilla, blah, blah, blah. What would you say to people who would say to you, well, Niel, if you want that one change of Guildbanks being in the game, then I'm sorry to tell you, buddy, but you might be more team changes. What would you say to that?
Well, they might be right. I don't know, but it's like I don't have any other examples of changes that I would like, but like I'm talking about inside the game. But to me, Guildbanks just makes sense. There's literally no negative impact, like aside from true classic feel. I don't see what could negatively impact. I know it can be a slippery slope to some and might be scared of, having long-term effects. But if it's the price we have to pay for a true classic experience, and we don't have Guildbanks, okay, that's fine. It's not a big issue, but I don't think it could be a problem.
Fair enough. Now, just if we pull back a little bit and talk more about game development in general. Now, given your experience in the industry, does it give you a great amount of respect or perhaps disdain, who knows, about the way in which Blizzard approaches the development of World of Warcraft? How do you feel about how they tackle their game?
From a technical standpoint, I think they're doing a wonderful job. I don't know if you've seen, they did a documentary of.
Yep.
I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe. I don't remember, but it was like they went into how they monitor the game and all those details. It was I was quite satisfied with how they did it. It was nice, but on the design standpoint, I think recently they've changed how they approach player satisfaction, and to me, it really doesn't fit with me. It doesn't fit with how I like to get rewards from games. Like I like to invest myself and have the payoff at a certain point, making my journey that much better. I think now they're focusing a lot on the payoff and not on the journey itself. And it's a way that works. Clearly, there's lots of people that play and they have fun, so that's fine. It just doesn't fit with how I like to play my games.
Okay, now is Blizzard the kind of company within the industry? Now, I know it's generally revered as a great company to work for in general, but from your personal perspective, even within the industry, and I think I know where the answer is going to go, but is it, say, personally for you, a place that you would love to work at, or are you still like, they're not really doing the kind of stuff that I want to be doing?
That's a good question. I would like to work there. I'm pretty sure their yearly bonuses are off the fucking charts because they have a lot of people that still play the game. I mean, I think they still have Diablo 2 games that sell. So, yeah. But aside from that, I think it could be quite interesting to work there. I mean, they have other games too. They don't only have WoW. They have Hearthstone. They have the Overwatch. That could be a lot of fun to work in, and most of the fun of working in the video game industry is the people you work with and the environment. So, and there's nothing quite like it, and I think it could be an amazing experience.
Now, you've mentioned that you've not worked on an MMO before. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is it something you would ever think about doing later in life?
Maybe, yeah. I'm open to pretty much anything. Yeah, it would be quite interesting.
Okay. Now, I should ask, with your time in the industry, what are some of your favorite developers? Who do you really look up to?
I really like Jeff Kaplan from Blizzard. That guy, you hear him speak, and I just want to go to sleep. It's not because he's boring, but because he's comforting. His global views of how to design things and what it means to the player, I think, is very, very very nice. there's some other folks from the old team of BioWare back in the old days. Those guys really knew how to make good games. Those are pretty my heroes.
What about in terms of companies? Are there any companies that you always have really respected or had a soft spot for?
It was Blizzard a while back. I think they made really good games that they were easy to approach, but they were very, very deep. I think with time that changed, but I still want to say it because I had a lot of respect for them back then. I still do. It's just maybe not as strong. Other developers, good question. I have to say, I really like the approach of Nintendo on some of their first-party titles. It may not appeal to everyone, but they put a lot of love into making their games, and that shows when you play them. You maybe not like the gameplay itself or like the 1,000th Mario that comes out, but every game is complete, and it's not something that you see everywhere.
Now, I'm not sure if this is well known by gamers or within the industry, and I'm just not sure what the answer might be, but is there one game or a couple of games that come to mind if I were to ask you, as a developer and with your experience coding and things like that, is there a title that clearly stands out as being one of the most technically amazing games from a development standpoint in terms of you wonder, fuck, that development team must have gone through a lot of time to bring this out. This is outstanding.
It's going to sound weird. I'm going to say No Man's Sky.
Wow.
Yeah, the game itself is really not fun. I've tried it, but when I played it, I saw like the amount of work that required and the change in design philosophy that they took. Like everything is machine generated. We just make rules and stuff comes alive. I think would have been an immense challenge to them. So I respect their effort. I don't respect the outcome though, but the effort is quite amazing though.
All right, Niel, you made it through the interview. You got through the hard part. Now it's time for the fun stuff. And now it's time for anger management. Each interview, I ask the interviewee to get angry about one particular subject and tell us what pissed them off about World of Warcraft. So, Niel, go nuts. What made you angry about World of Warcraft Vanilla?
Yeah, I want to talk to all the warriors who might be hearing this or the wannabe warriors in the classic future. If you want to be a Fury warrior, that's fine, man. You go have fun, but please keep a fucking shield with you, a tanking set. Just, dude, if you want to go to a group, a dungeon, and, I want to be DPS. No, man, just put on the fucking shield and go tank, man. It will be faster for everyone. You will get more groups this way, and it would just be a more responsible warrior. Like, what warrior doesn't carry tanking gear with them? Seriously.
Very good. All right, shots fired. All you warriors, take note. Niel's coming for you. Bring a shield. All right. Now it's time for the hot seat. Each episode, I ask the interviewee about 10 fun hypothetical questions. So, Niel, you ready for this one?
Yeah.
All right, so question number 1, Niel, here we go. A Canadian, an American, and an Australian game developer walk into a bar. Who gets the girl and why?
I think it's the American because he's a good seller.
Okay, all right. Now, you're familiar with the game Fuck, Marry, Kill. Would that be fair to say?
Yep.
Okay, now we'll give you a special developer's edition of this question. And I've got 3 AAA upcoming titles for you to choose between. Fuck, Marry, Kill, Red Dead Redemption 2, Super Smash Bros., and Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Who you got?
Well, that's a good question. I will leave a hint. I work for one of the companies making these games.
I have a funny feeling. All right.
All right. So there's one I don't care for, and there's Smash. I used to play a lot when I was a kid, but I'm not anymore. So sadly, this will be my kill. Fuck would be Assassin's Creed Odyssey, because I like the Assassin's Creed games only for a short time. So that would be it. And Red Dead Redemption 2.
Fair enough. Fantastic. All right, next question. If French Canadians were a playable class in World of Warcraft, what would be the first talent point improvement that you would suggest you'd pick up for them?
Would be stop whining. Would be 5 points. Max that as soon as possible.
Fantastic. Okay, what's the meanest thing that you've ever done in World of Warcraft?
Okay. Back when I was raiding in vanilla, I went to all the raids and I had the most TKP and all of that. And I played too much. One of the raids, there was a brutality blade that dropped off Gar, and I know the rogues wanted that so much, and I got it because I liked weapons, and it wasn't maybe the best upgrade, but I was kind of a prima donna at that time, so yeah, I took them all, man.
Fair enough. Okay, now do you have a proudest in-game moment?
Getting my Thunder Fury. That was really nice.
Awesome.
Also,
yep.
Yeah, but the one of them, and I will say it's 50-50 with meeting my wife in World of Warcraft.
Oh, of course, I forgot. Absolutely. You mentioned that last time. So now the next question will be: do you have a most embarrassing in-game moment? And maybe I'll coin this one a little bit differently. You met your wife in-game. Do you know if you had a most embarrassing in-game moment involving your wife?
Most embarrassing moment. I did cause a wipe because she was texting me inappropriate stuff. Yeah, that happened. And another embarrassing moment, maybe not related to my wife, is when I was a noob. I started, and one of my first characters was a priest. I did a Winning Caverns run, and I knew that warriors and shamans upgraded their armor class at level 40. So I thought everybody upgraded their armor class, and I thought at level 40 I would be able to use leather, and I needed on a piece of leather that a rogue didn't get, and he was quite pissed, and I told him, hey man, it's fine, I'll use it at 40, and yeah, that's quite embarrassing.
Very good. Now, outside of the first 5 minutes of World of Warcraft, when the camera pans in on you, you've got the voiceover happening, and you get to control your character and get a few quests for the first time, forgetting that, a little bit further down the track, whenever it might have been, what was the moment that you fell in love with World of Warcraft?
When I leveled my warrior. That's when I really fell in love with the journey of World of Warcraft.
And that was the second character you started, was it?
No, it was the fourth one, because I made a couple characters level 20 and then gave up. But when I started leveling the warrior, I really fell in love with it and explored the game. I had a really lot of fun.
Okay. Now, final question for you, Niel. Tell me why you are most excited for World of Warcraft Classic.
I really can't wait to feel that journey again, to also play with my old buddies of the guild we made back then, really get the community feel back. That's what I'm most looking forward to.
Okay. Now, Niel, you made it. That's everything, buddy. Thank you so much again for coming back on the show. I cannot thank you enough. The listeners of Countdown to Classic cannot thank you enough for your incredibly insightful opinions that you've given here today. Please, one more time, obviously you mentioned if anyone wants to find you, if anyone might have any questions, you're available on Discord and on Twitter. Is that correct? You want to plug that again?
Yeah, on Discord, I'm on the Countdown Classic server, of course, and also the Classic WoW Discord. If you want to speak to me there, also my Twitter is at the Niel Deal.
Fantastic. Okay, Niel, thanks so much again, mate. We shall talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Josh.
And that's the interview with Niel, and thank you so much again to him for taking the time out for Countdown to Classic. But with that done, now it's time for one quick pre-classic update. Call on Calling Countdown. Okay, we've got a caller on the line, and who have we got, and where in the world are you calling from?
Hey, what's up, man? This is John, otherwise known as PWJ, and I'm calling from New York City.
Excellent. Yes, PWJ, you've obviously been active in the Discord, and it's great to finally chat to you after we've exchanged a few messages over the last couple of months. So you contacted me and said that you wanted to perhaps have a quick chat about maybe the general difficulty of World of Warcraft. And you mentioned something about a story on of your experience in a private server of fully clearing Molten Core on the first release day. Is that right?
Yeah, man. I've been playing with a group of guys in a guild called Rain on K3, and it's really my first time kind of hammering through vanilla content since I played it back in the day. So it was interesting to go back, get an idea of what these raids were like and how to tackle them with a kind of a try-hard mindset,
Okay, so whenabouts was this clearing of Molten Core on the private server? Was it recent?
Yeah, just last month, K3 released Molten Core and Annexia in their first big patch on the new server in May. And we were there waiting at the gates the minute it opened up, man.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned it sounded like you that was your first time there in a while. Have you not been playing many private servers recently? Was this your first foray into a private server?
Yeah, I'd kind of played WoW since the start my whole life. My only taste of a vanilla server, however, was on Astarius, and unfortunately I caught it at the tail end of it. So didn't quite hit max level until unfortunately it got shut down. So this was my first real attempt, when the server went live. My brother and I hit it right off the bat. And yeah, we were there for the first release. It's nice.
So when we talk about things like, the general difficulty of vanilla and how people will be coming back to it when classic releases, you're an interesting person to talk to because you're not someone who has been powering away at private servers ad infinitum over the last few years. It sounds like this was, as you say, your first step into Molten Core for perhaps, 14, 13 years. Did it bring back a lot of memories of the difficulty, or obviously you found it not very difficult because you cleared it straight away? Were you surprised at how easily it was to step back into those shoes?
Absolutely, man. My first time in original vanilla, I think I faintly remember getting Night Slayer belt off trash, and I was so hyped. But now seeing these guys, I got to say, these guys from Rain, they're excellent at what they do. They're private server veterans, so they kind of held my hand a bit, and they knew what they were doing right off the bat. So a lot of the mechanics that I thought may have been super difficult back in the day, I didn't realize could be solved with something as simple as a restoration potion or something like that, really trivialize a lot of the fights. And this guild goes above and beyond with things like requiring engineering for a mass amount of the raiders in order to use Goblin Sapphire charges to quickly nuke trash or ads on boss fights. And when everyone's got their head in the game, man, we got to say, we cleared some bosses in 37 seconds, stuff like that, and really didn't hit many problems, maybe one stupid wipe along the way, but we managed to clear Molten Core within 3 to 4 hours from the release.
So one of my favorite topics to talk about when we talk about what's going to happen with Classic is that of face rolling. And this is a light example of face rolling. Now, some people might be standing up and yelling, "Hey, Josh, we're just talking about Molten Core here. Settle down." But I guess it all kind of flows on in a way. Do you feel that due to the way in which you've now experienced these veterans, as you say, who might have been having you somewhat tag along or teaching you a thing or two along the way, having them tear through Molten Core, that will then flow down through the next few raids?
Yeah, it's interesting because it was something I had thought about a lot too, before stepping into the server. I too wasn't sure how easy Molten Core may or may not be. And I just want to make a note, I'm not exactly sure if the stats on K3 are identical to what they were in vanilla. But I can imagine it's probably pretty close to the same. I mean, if there's a 5-10% HP difference, that might add on 7 seconds to these fights on Real Classic.
So I guess one question that I'd have for you, and you'd be a good person to answer, is now that you've kind of dabbled with the private server veterans and having not much experience with them before, but also remembering what things were like in vanilla, going into Classic, would you want to group up with private server veterans again, or are you more than happy to just play with regular players?
That's a tough call. I have to say I'd be pretty tempted to play with the private server community. After having now played with them, I gotta say, man, I really don't like wasting time. Stupid wipes on raids that add up to a lot, If I know the raid can be cleared in 3 to 4 hours, it's tempting to just roll with those veterans that know what they're doing, just bang it out quick. And it's just better for everyone, you got 40 people waiting on you. So yeah, it would be fun with maybe people who aren't as experienced in it, almost like a progression guild, working on fights and maybe having wipes and having trouble and figuring it out. So it's the first raid content. So blowing through it with private server guys isn't that bad, Maybe on Max or even BWL or AT or something like that, hitting it with kind of a clean slate could be more fun,
Now, in saying that these guys were clearly veterans and perhaps knew a trick or two that you maybe didn't, did you find that you were under the pump, as we say here in Australia, or feeling a little bit stressed that you would be sort of called out at times or as you were learning?
Absolutely, man. Yeah. I felt like I was under the crosshair, kind of an outsider. A lot of these guys knew one another, and they actually have a website called Chronos Logs, where shortly after every fight and every raid, there's a list that's produced that shows every single shaman's healing for each fight and where you rank amongst everyone in the server, So I knew I really had to pull up my bootstraps and try hard because they'd know if I was not carrying my weight. And I think I may have had 1 or 2 deaths that I thought to myself, fuck, that was stupid. I shouldn't have died there. So I was definitely playing serious, man. I was a little worried, but I've healed a lot. I played a lot of high-end arenas later in WoW where I healed, so I feel pretty good under the gun when it comes to that.
Oh wow! So there's really nowhere to hide. You can't hide your shame at all with a guild like that.
Nah, definitely not, man. And I gotta say, the leader, he's a good guy, and he runs a tight ship. He's from everything from, even if a single person is lagging behind because they're drinking, their name's getting called out on Discord, and so it'd be pretty obvious if you're slipping up, who's gonna call you out on it, and people who weren't pulling their weight, it'd get cut. So it was fun, man. I kind of like that. I like that experience.
You like being pushed to a higher level when you're sort of on the edge of your seat a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely, man. when every single chain heal counts, and I'm trying to top all the other shamans in the group and stuff. So I like it. I like it a lot. It's where it's my kind of environment.
Now tell me, is there anything else that you might be looking to do in Classic that perhaps you didn't do in the vanilla days?
Yeah, plenty for sure. Like I hit Classic. I remember leveling my first character and seeing the Naxxramas temples were already up in the air. So it was towards the end of the game before Burn Crusade came out. So I only got to level up a little bit in PvP before they changed the whole system. So I'd like to do that again. Like I said, I had never even full cleared Molten Core in original vanilla. So even though I've done it now, I'd like to do it in Classic and also see all that other stuff. EWL, AQ40, all that stuff. I'm really looking forward to it. I almost think of this private server as like a PTR for Classic. So I'm kind of feeling things out, seeing what I like, trying to find out whether or not shamans can be the class for me, what professions I like, etc. So that when the real thing hits, I can, go into it knowing exactly what I want to do, what I want to play. So.
Okay, and I guess the last thing that I'll ask you is this, and it's something that, I've talked about a little bit on the show and obviously made a now relatively infamous bet with the big fish on over facerolling. And what would you guess is going to happen with higher tier content when we talk about things like the implementation of Naxxramas? How long do you think it's going to take guilds to get through this stuff?
Man, after seeing what these guys pulled off, even though Molten Core would be considered easy, just the efficiency. I mean, our raid literally has a spreadsheet with every single fight detailed, every single dispel, every single consumable. I imagine there's going to be a vast majority of people when even things like Nax come out, they're going to have this kind of stuff detailed down to the wire, and we can expect it's probably going to get blown through. But that's not the end of the world. It's okay. People are going to do it, but I'd have to say if it wasn't down within the first 24 to 48 hours, I'd honestly be surprised.
So can I wave goodbye to my $20 right now? The KT's definitely going down in the first 24 hours.
Yeah, I mean, be ready to part with it. I think.
All right.
That was the bet you made?
Yeah, that was the bet. I'm going to have to start making more bets to get that money back on that silly
absolutely.
one. All right. Thanks so much for calling in, PWJ, and we will talk to you again soon.
Excellent. Thanks. Have a good one.
And that's been Calling Countdown and the show for the day. Now, a quick note to all of you who have sent in a memory lane submission in the past couple of weeks. I have not forgotten about you. I'm sitting on about 10 of them, and they will come over a few installments over the next week or so on the show. So don't fear, your amazing literary efforts were not made in vain. I can assure you of that. And I also just want to give you all one quick update about the show moving forward. And this is rather a big one in terms of the format of the show and how we'll be progressing from here. You may have heard over the last couple of weeks that the show has relied a bit more on interviews at times when I'm snowed under at work or when other real-life commitments get in the way of my regular schedule. Well, a few more real-life commitments have popped up a bit unexpectedly recently. And moving forward, it seems I simply can't keep up the kind of format that I have been maintaining for the past 4 months, working about 30 plus hours on the show each week on top of my regular job. So don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom, and I'm not asking from anything from anyone. I'm just letting you know I sought the sage advice of the Countdown Council as well as other listeners on the show, and ultimately decided to try to stick to 3 episodes per week nonetheless. But of those 3 episodes, from now on 2 will be interviews, as these are far less stressful on my personal time. And the 3rd will change every week between forums and the lore. So if you're a lore or a forums fan, then I do apologize that you'll get that content just slightly less frequently, but it will still absolutely come your way AAA, so please do not stress. This will be a bit of a trial period just to see if I can keep that up. But the worst case scenario, if that doesn't work, would result in me cutting back to 2 episodes per week and tinkering with the format yet again. But we're not there yet. Time will tell everyone. So just please be assured that the show is not going anywhere. I'm just making slight alterations all the time that will leave everybody happy in the end. So sorry to all of those who wanted no changes for Countdown to Classic. Believe me, I did too. But while still attempting to bring you that authentic Countdown experience and realizing that countdown means countdown, sometimes changes are inevitable. Ooh, cryptic. But with all that done, as per usual, I want to thank the members of the Countdown Council, whom I call every week for input on where the show is heading. So shout out to Borzen, Raidmar, Camp Sowen, Palfurus, Rarebit, Seven Winters, Tsunami, Wilson Ma, and Valaco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. Countdown to Classic would not be the same without your support, I can assure you of that. Also, a big thank you to supporters Hurlbert, Good Kisser, Myrtlebanks, and Purgatos81, as always. Thanks for listening, everyone. I shall see you again on Wednesday with The Real Marky Mark. Catch you then.